So deviant is, like I said, one of those words that we think of, we associate it with criminals and lunatics and ne'er-do-wells, people who are somehow messing with the fabric of our society. But in fact, the word deviant has a fairly neutral meaning. It's basically just somebody who differs from the norms and expectations of their society, and in their behavior differs from the folks around them. So a healthy deviant, in my mind, is just somebody who does that in the service of their own health and well-being. It's somebody who's willing to depart from the norms and conventions of their society in order to become an unusually healthy, happy person. So healthy deviance is a form of what I call inspired noncompliance. It's not noncompliance for the sake of being different or difficult. It's noncompliance for a purpose, and that higher purpose is living in a better life. But it's also a form of innovation. And for those of us who work in the realms of business and corporate life or organizations, deviance is a requirement to move forward from the status quo. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to start by talking generally about what healthy deviance is and how I came to know what I know about it and how I think it's useful to health seekers. But I'm going to frame it in the second half of my presentation and talk more specifically about how it impacts leaders and leadership and the role that healthy deviant leaders have in creating healthier outcomes for all of us. How many of you have seen The Matrix? It's a great film, and I'm going to just play you a tiny piece of it, and then we'll talk a little bit more. So for those of you who have not seen the whole film, this is the place where the protagonist, Neo, the young man, has a choice between these two pills, and one pill is going to show him his reality, and one pill allows him to just continue along in his blissful ignorance of what's really going on. When he takes the pill that shows him his reality, what he finds out he's living in the midst of an illusion, a hallucination that's a mass shared hallucination created by this gigantic perception-creating machine. So what Anil Seth was talking about is kind of at the basis of the idea of this film, waking up to the horror of living inside of this parasitic machine that's sucking the energy and the life force out of humanity in order to feed itself is not so terribly different, of course, from what we are living in now. So to help to demonstrate that, I'm asking for 100 volunteers. If you have a card, you are one of those volunteers. You don't know it yet. But if you have a card, you'll have it numbered 1 through 100. If you would please stand up. Excellent. Okay, so this group of people currently standing represents the U.S. adult population at this time. And I want to tell you, this is the easiest volunteer job many of you will ever have, because you're not going to have to come up here or do anything that makes you feel silly. You're going to represent both the disease states and challenges of our society, and I hope also help to demonstrate the power of healthy deviance. So for right now, 50% of U.S. adults have been diagnosed with at least one chronic illness, something like diabetes or heart disease. In some cases, cancers are now considered to be chronic. And what we know is that if you've been diagnosed with one chronic disease, the chances are you have more than one, because there's a cascade that occurs from inflammatory diseases. The same thing that causes type 2 diabetes eventually causes other things like heart disease. So it's also true that a lot of people who have not yet been diagnosed with an illness have one. They just don't want to go to the doctor and get the diagnosis. They haven't gotten that little slip of paper that says that they're the proud owner of a disease. But 50% of the U.S. population currently chronically ill and diagnosed that way. So I'm going to have anybody with a number 1 through 50 sit down. Okay, thank you. That wasn't that hard. 68% of U.S. adults are overweight or obese. And, there's a lot of evidence that suggests being a little bit overweight isn't necessarily unhealthy. Overweight by whose standards, right? It depends on your circumstances, your body type. But at some point, significant overweight is associated with a bunch of inflammatory diseases, and your risks increase. So 68% of U.S. adults currently overweight or obese. And this number has actually, I think, gone up since we made these slides. Maybe it's at 70% right now. So if you have a number up to 68, you can sit down. 70% of U.S. adults are currently taking at least one prescription drug. Now, this is an annual number, but they're putting the daily number somewhere between 55 and 70%. This, again, is older. And the numbers have gone up a lot in the past few years. Almost everybody is taking at least one pharmaceutical drug, which is basically a form of drug dependence, if you think about it. So 70% of U.S. adults, most of these are things like antacids, antidepressants, but increasingly like antipsychotic drugs are being prescribed to children. cholesterol medications, like a lot of people are on these drugs. And then things like autoimmune drugs, like biologics, like Humira. How many people have seen a Humira ad? Yeah, they're everywhere. If you don't have a television, you're probably the person who has not seen a Humira ad. So if you have a number up to 70, you can sit down. We're losing a few more of you. And you can see that the ranks are thinning quite substantially. What happened to our U.S. adult population? Where are they now? Gets worse. 80% of U.S. adults are not thriving or flourishing mentally and emotionally. And so this means that only about 20% of U.S. adults are. The rest of them are suffering from some level of depression, anxiety, mood challenges, attention disorders, cognitive problems. So if you have a number up to 80, you can sit down, and including 80. And you'd think, wow, that's pretty terrible. And yet somehow it gets worse. Right now, according to the Mayo Clinic Proceedings report of a few years back, 97.3% of U.S. adults are not practicing even 4 of the basic healthy behaviors or habits that would allow you to continue to stay healthy and happy, or reasonably well adjusted anyway, over the long haul. So if you have a number, I guess, up to, let's say 97, we'll keep the third. Where are you guys now back there? Oh, hi. Hello. A couple people left standing. Thank you very much. Interestingly, the factors that the Mayo Clinic Proceedings did include, which again, just to remind you, had to do with, let's see, they did actually list them here. There we go. They included things like eating a reasonably healthy diet, but their version of the healthy diet was the USDA nutrition guidelines, which are notorious. I know, it's like, not the best standard, right? But okay. And then moving about 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, which is sort of a moderate level of movement and exercise. The third one was not smoking. And the fourth one was maintaining a healthy body composition. That was as measured, I think, by a DEXA scan, but associated with the BMI standards, which again, a little bit debatable, but you get the sense. That's what they were counting. What they were not counting were any of these factors. And stress and sleep and social connection are now thought to be at least as important, if not more important, than things like smoking. And sleep in particular, we now know, like if you're not sleeping, it doesn't matter how many other great things you're doing, you will get sick and die early or kill someone else. So the question is, if 97.3% of people aren't doing the 4 things that they did count, how many people do you think are doing those 4 things plus these other 3 things? And I'm guessing it can't be more than 1% of the U.S. adult population. So we're going to have 2 of you sit down. Anybody with a number, anything except number 100, I guess, 98, 99, you guys can sit. And this leaves us with our Healthy Deviant. And how are you doing out there all by yourself? He's great. Yeah. So you have several hundred people just looking at you like, why are you still standing up? And yet I'm not going to let you sit because I want us all to feel what it feels like we'll do the empathetic thing that Anil Seth was talking about. Said, let's put ourselves in this guy's shoes. What did he have to do to be the 1 out of 100 that left him in that position? How many norms did he have to defy? How many behaviors that were inconvenient or unconventional or expensive or inaccessible did he have to forge his way forward to embrace? And how does it feel to be the person in your position? I mean, I get you're doing great, but isn't it also just a little awkward to have me talking to you like this when everyone else is watching? Lonely, vulnerable, awkward. Let's give this guy a hand, first of all, because thank you for taking one to the team. So there's the question of what does it feel, but there's that question of what does it require? And I want you to just think for yourself about the ways that you are already, in some form, a healthy deviant. I have a quiz that you can take that's like my definition of healthy deviance. But I think most people who show up at conferences like this are inherently deviant. This is an odd topic, at least in our society right now. He's nodding, feeling a little bit like a freak sometimes, And it does take energy to go against the grain. So you could ask yourself these questions. Am I a healthy deviant? What does it mean? What does it require? I think the bigger question is what kind of society makes it so difficult to be healthy and reasonably well-adjusted that, 2% approximately of the population can pull it off. And I think there's really only one answer to that question, which is that it would be a sick society. And this is a wonderful quote from Jita Krishnamurti. He says, "It is no measure of health to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And I really think, when Mo opened and talked about that sense of anguish and anxiety that we're feeling, it's this shared perception that we have that things are not going very well right now. And there's a lot of opportunity for improvement. So I call the world we're living in right now the unhealthy default reality. And it's kind of like that perception that Neo wakes up to in the Matrix, that there's some gigantic parasitic machine creating my reality and encouraging me to behave certain ways, and it's sucking me of all of my life force and my money and my time and my care, my attention. So it's sucking up all of our friends and lovers and coworkers and family members. And then if you choose to be the oddball out, you're kind of on the outside of something that operates a lot like an immune system. It hunts down the other, the strange, and it tries to suck you in. So you're pulling yourself trying to be healthy, and the unhealthy default reality is like, would you like a donut? Would you like to smell the donut? Would you like to sit in front of this screen at home and play with the joystick and just get points and collect Candy Crush, whatever? I don't know if I was like, you know what I mean? Like, this is the unhealthy default reality. What is normal is killing everyone we love. But if you pull yourself out of it, you're constantly at odds with a system designed to pull you back in. So how did we get here? It was not always like this. We're living in a time of very strange and unprecedented circumstances. So I like to put up kind of the big picture. Unfortunately, this is not the very big picture. If I made the real picture the right size, that line that represents the history of humanity starting with the dawn of man would be several hundred feet further, maybe 1,000 feet. 2.5 million years of human history is a very long, long time relative to the rest of this graph. So this is not to scale in a big way. But what happened basically is we evolved over 2.5 million years, and all of our DNA got accustomed to living in hunter-gatherer and tribal societies with small groups of people with whom we had very intimate connections, eating nothing but foods that we hunted or gathered and living in, circumstances that we basically built for ourselves. We also had a very different relationship with the world around us. According to what historians say and anthropologists and most scholars, because of the relationship that humans had to their natural environment, which again, Anil Seth referenced earlier, they perceived everything as much more magical and spiritually interesting and essential to their self. They saw themselves as connected to their environment in ways that we no longer do. But that's the way it was for 2.5 million years until about 10,000 years ago when we got the agricultural revolution. And that changed everything. It changed our food supply. We started domesticating animals, having grains stored, lots of surpluses for the first time that allowed for specialization of people. They didn't just have to hunt and gather for their own food. People became artisans, moved into villages. And eventually we developed a very different kind of cadence and rhythm to our lives, which was all cool. But it also led to other circumstances that eventually took us to the Industrial Revolution of about 200 years ago. Machines, steam-powered things, grinding stuff up like flours and sugars by machine purposes. That led to a whole bunch more changes that eventually led to the technological revolution, computers, electronics, about 60-some years ago. And that led, of course, then to this digital handheld, everybody has lots of devices, digital revolution of, some people put it 20, 25 years ago. And so if you really consider how much accelerating change has happened and how recently some of these profoundly important changes have happened, you have to think, we're the very first generation in the history of humanity to be living the way we are living right now. We are, in fact, a living experiment, which is why we have a podcast titled that. But nothing can prepare you for that. And your genes are still set up for 2.5 million years of programming to operate one way. And so it creates this, what's called an evolutionary mismatch. And I just want to show you what that means. The way that I visualize it now is that what I'm encouraged to see when I look at the mass media is what's wrong with me, right? My rash, my migraine, my inflammatory disease, my face is the wrong face, my body is the wrong body. There's something, all of those problems, I'm encouraged to see as my problem and ask, what's wrong with me? And this is a forest for the trees problem. While we are so busy looking at those trees, what we are not seeing is what you could see if instead of just looking at what society presents for us to see when the Humira ad, take a step this way. And you can see the longer view of how we got here. 2.5 million years of our genetic programming, leading to an agricultural and industrial, technological, digital revolution, abrupt change, right? That creates evolutionary mismatch, which is chronic stress. And that leads to the unhealthy default reality that we're living in, which is producing not just the diseases, but the automatic default choices that lead to those diseases, the unsustainable patterns, how we relate to natural resources, where does our garbage go? All of these things is like part and parcel of the way we have been brought up to perceive normal reality. They lead very naturally to the disorders and diseases and chronic conditions that we're suffering from. But we don't see that. It's not what we're encouraged to see. So, one way to think about this is a vicious cycle of the unhealthy default reality. The automatic default choices naturally lead to the unhealthy problems that we have, and then we're presented with solutions. Take the prescription drug, go on this little diet, do this special workout, a juice detox is all you need. Why don't you take these other supplements? Maybe if you stayed home and watched this virtual reality thing, you'd feel better. So, and I'm for nutrition and I'm for movement and I'm for stress relief, but the solutions we're being presented with are solutions for the problems that are produced by the society. We embrace them and we try them, and some of them work and some of them don't, but the ones that work require constant input and resources. And a lot of them we try to do and they don't work very well and we feel we've failed. How many people have gone on a diet only to find that diet did not produce the result? Or you tried it and you couldn't stay on it, right? That then leads to this sense of I have failed and I blame myself, and now I'm stressed out because I'm not succeeding with the program or in the eyes of my society. And this goes on to this point where you start to feel like you failed and now you're judging yourself. That leaves you feeling even more vulnerable and reactive, and you become overwhelmed and start looking for more short-term solutions and desperate magic bullet things. We get now to gastric bypass surgeries. We get to all kinds of amputations and things that are really permanently disfiguring, but also that sense of like, what is wrong with me? Why am I this way? How come? That mindset is one that eventually leads you to a sense of what's called learned helplessness. You try, you fail, you try, you fail, you try, you fail until you just forget it. I can't do this anymore. So there's another way of going about doing this, and the virtuous cycle of healthy deviance, I framed it this way, and I think everyone has had the experience of when life gets a little better naturally and you just stumble onto something that you're like, oh, unexpected. Meditation like that is for a lot of people. And I think really healthy deviance begins with amplified awareness, however you get there. If it's through a mindfulness practice or hitting rock bottom and just going, what's really going on? I'm going to talk about how I got to my own place of that. Amplified awareness leads to willingness rather than being forced into willpower. From willingness, if you're willing to try something new and experiment, you develop new perceptions. You get new experiences, not the expected experience. Preemptive repair and replenishment is another really, once you start to realize how quickly we're becoming worn down and the fact that you are feeling depleted, the earlier you can get to taking evasive action, self-arrest, self-care, daily practices like meditation are a great form of preemptive repair. Before you even go out into the world, you prepare yourself to deal with the unhealthy default reality. That leads you to a place of expanding energy, gives you more capacity to continue to learn and grow and develop what I call are the skills of the healthy person. Experimenting day to day, knowing that circumstances change, rather than feeling like you're failing when something doesn't work. You're like, what happened? How did that not work? And that leads to increased agency and autonomy, which leaves you in a much better place to remain conscious and aware of what's going on around you. You take the red pill. Oh, this is how it is. So why does all of this matter? I think we have been told that it matters because of this. You're supposed to look like this. This is what health and fitness look like. This is put in our faces constantly. Flat abs, your best body ever, and prepare because the new year is coming and all of the new year, new you stuff is going to come at you, swinging at your head, telling you how to completely recreate yourself and look like that. So that's not really what health is about at all. And in fact, health is at the essence of our human freedom. If you don't have your health, you begin losing your choices very quickly. How many people have been close to someone who has become significantly, like acutely or chronically ill and had to go to the hospital? How much freedom do you have as that person or as the person who loves that person in that period following a significant illness, right? Your body is no longer your own, your time, your choices, and you sink so much into dealing with ill health, you don't have a lot of resources to do anything else. Health also drives our capacity and our ability to change our circumstances. So when you become vulnerable, when you become injured, when you become ill, you become depleted in ways, and the resources of your family, your friends, your community also do. And of course, at the biggest level, beyond our communities and our neighborhoods and our homes, we have this community called the planet out there on the fringes, like that of the universe. And we're all stuck here together in this very limited set of resources with a bunch of big problems. And they are not going to be solved by a bunch of really ill, depleted people. So we need healthy, happy, highly vital people to solve these problems. So I'm going to switch gears and tell you how I came to this myself, because I've spent a long time thinking about this stuff, and I'm a journalist by trade, but this magazine came after I learned things the hard way. I started it in 2001. I went to Huffington Post briefly, left, came back, did another stint at Huffington Post. And in 2019, which is this year, I just have completely decided to commit myself to talking about this, about Healthy Deviance, because all of the diets and the workouts that I learned about, all of that stuff is fascinating, but it isn't enough. It's not really changing the game. This is also the work stream of my hair is now completely silver. And I think it was well spent silverness, because it shouldn't take, I don't think, 20 years to figure this out. But the fact that it took me that long, I don't want anybody else to spend that much time beating themselves up as I did. So what happened to me was that, I should say, this is me as a child at about maybe 1.5, 2. That's my mother pregnant with my sister smoking a cigarette. That's in 1968, 69. And that was a very, it was an experimental time, I think you could say. But my mother was actually a very health-interested person. No one told women that smoking cigarettes was probably not a great idea for you or your child. But I was a flower child, quite literally, as you can see. This is my mom and dad. My mom was sort of a utopian idealist, back to the land farmer. My dad was a sociologist. And both of them encouraged us as kids to do our own thing, be our own person. Don't be constrained by realities, mores and manners. And yet, even with the societal support, even with my parental support, and even with the weirdest childhood, growing up on a kind of an organic hippie commune, grew our own food, we didn't have televisions, we played creative, wholesome type games. This is me playing in a pile of debris. I'm the one walking away. We built all of our houses out of recycled materials. I mean, it was a really crunchy granola upbringing. But what happened to me is that when I went to school and started relating with other kids my own age, I realized how weird we were, because people told me I was weird. I didn't have the right clothes. I didn't bring the right school lunch stuff. I didn't have the right toys. I didn't watch TV. I didn't know any of the lingo. Really, I was from another planet. And kids would not sit next to us on the bus because they thought we were weird and people were talking about us and spreading rumors. And that was a very painful experience. So like any good American kid, I decided I knew how to do this. I'd get with the program. And I started aiming for what I saw on the covers of magazines and on TV, which was by 1980 something a picture about like this. And, I judged myself really harshly in all of the ways that I did not measure up to this type of picture. Put a ton of pressure on myself to constantly be improving, to measure up to society's standards of what a successful woman was like in my mind. And I would read a lot of magazines like this. What's interesting is that when I started departing from the weirdness was when I started having health problems. I was a very healthy child. But when I started figuring I should be thinner and I went on diets and I should be more fit and I started doing these crazy workouts and I started having anxiety and not being able to sleep about that, I got less and less happy and healthy the more normal I got. And then I embraced this. Get a flat belly. Who doesn't want a flat belly? That sounds great. 860 moves for a hot upper body. Who does that? And who has time? 860 moves is just the top part. Remember, you can imagine the lower end And what happened to my lower end was I broke myself, quite literally. One day, I was having a bad day. I had a lot of bad days. And on some bad days, I would just rant and fume and cry. And on this particular day, I got frustrated. I didn't have enough time. I didn't have enough space. I couldn't get it all done. It wasn't good enough. I wasn't getting myself to where I needed to be successful. And in a fit of self-directed frustration, I stomped my foot on a wooden floor so hard I broke my 5th metatarsal. Just heard that thing crack. If you have ever broken a bone, how many people have broken a bone? Did you hear it go? Oh, it's the worst. It's like there's something in us that knows this is not good. And I think you hear it even before you feel it. There's something, anyway, it gave way and I fell on the floor sobbing and crying and feeling very sorry for myself until a few big insights hit me. And the first one was just the recognition that I had literally broken my body. I'd broken myself. And what happens when you do that is you recognize your capacity for self-violence, being strong enough to do that. It was really pretty terrifying. Contemplated that for a minute, and then I had another realization, which was that as dramatic as the breakage of the bone was, it wasn't actually anything new. I had been breaking myself for a very long time, and I had symptoms to show it. I was losing the eyelashes on one eye. I was getting night sweats. I was developing rashes, picking at myself. I was stomach pain, back pain, joint pain, brain fog, irritation. So all of these symptoms had been accumulating and I'd been ignoring them until my body gave me this signal that I could not really avoid paying attention to. So I would love for you to just take a moment and reflect on, are there ways that you are breaking yourself? How might you be breaking yourself? Is there evidence on or in your body of early stage self-breakage? Because the reason that we only had one oddball standing, I see you back there, oddball, that's what's normal right now. The unhealthy default reality has made it normal for us to be breaking ourselves and each other. That's what I want to ask as we switch into the leadership piece of this. Of those of you who are running teams or organizations or setting policies and standards for the companies you're in, are you or are other leaders in the organization encouraging other people to break themselves? Because I think that that's a big part of what's going on in our society right now. What can you do as business leaders? What can we do as innovators? First, remember that work is in fact a society in and of itself. Every culture, every corporate culture develops its own norms and behaviors and encourages people to do healthy and or unhealthy things. And this attitude of we must keep going, we must get the next, the goal must be hit at any cost. We take that out of ourselves and each other in pretty dramatic ways. So I'm going to tell you a tiny little story of another kind of interesting, not a cautionary tale, but I think an instructive one. I was teaching a course out at the 1440 Multiversity, and I taught a session on what I call ultradian rhythms. I'm going to talk about those in just a minute. Ultradian rhythms are a natural rhythm cycle in the body that happen every 90 to 120 minutes. You have peaks of energy followed by troughs of energy, and it's kind of a productive and repair cycle that nobody teaches us about. I'm going to teach you a little bit about it today. Passion of mine. Anyway, I taught this course, and then afterwards, one of the guys who had been in the course came up and he said, I'm from a leading software company in Silicon Valley, and I'm so interested in what you just said because I have been getting all of these requests from people in my organization to fire or reprimand this guy on my team who keeps taking naps on the job. He brought a beanbag chair into his office. And every day, a couple times a day, this guy just sacks out in the beanbag chair. So he was getting pressure. People were taking pictures of him and sending pictures to the boss and saying, fire this guy. He's a complete lazy guy. And I was like, he's like, I'm really rethinking that now. I think what he's doing is taking these ultradian rhythm breaks. I was like, that's fascinating. How does he perform as a contributor? It's like the best guy on my team. He's got more good ideas and he gets things. He's not getting behind in his work. He's like, okay, well, there you go. Let that be a lesson to you. So, but we are in this mindset that our jobs as leaders, we're, again, culturally encouraged to think of our job as getting the most out of people. And so I think one of the first things that we can do as leaders is to encourage the development of businesses and organizations and teams that challenge the assumption that more is always better and it should come out of us. Whatever the externally created goal is, we must pull it out of ourselves because it does come out of our cell tissue. It comes out of our skeletons. So first, refuse to be an extractive industry. Okay, that's nice, but how do you do that? How do you challenge that assumption? How do you change that part of a society that was built by other people and that you're trying to make your way in? I offer 3 nonconformist competencies. The first, I'm going to get rid of that. The first one is amplified awareness. And that's basically just noticing what's going on in and around you. It's noticing everything from your psycho-emotional state to your physical state. What triggers you to eat the unhealthy thing? What triggers you to go working for hours without a break? If you don't notice what's happening, it's really hard to intervene and make a different decision. And noticing in your own group of people, are people getting sick a lot? Are people kind of looking like they're on their last frayed nerve? Look into people's eyes and you'll start to see who on your team is cycling down and who's managing to hold it together. And you can learn a lot by that, just looking at the bright spots in your organization and seeing how are they coping, these healthy, happy people that remain the oddballs. And also, like, what's the ratio? How many healthy, happy people versus not? That can be very instructive. The second nonconformist competency, as I mentioned, is preemptive repair. And that's this idea that we have to get ahead of the damage that is done to us and that we do to ourselves just by virtue of living in an unhealthy default reality in a society where more people are inflamed and unhealthy than not. So meditation, food, sleep, all the things that you know that you quote unquote should do, rather than thinking about them as things that you need to do to fix yourself, think about them as being things that you do to protect yourself, to inoculate yourself against the unhealthy default reality. The more vitality and resilience you have, the more capable you are of bringing some form of like resistance to that or just sidestepping it. That brings me to the third big competency, which is continuous growth and learning. It takes real skill to develop the knowledge base and the habits and all of these things that allow you to do this. You don't learn them all at once. You don't need 860 moves for a hot upper body, but you do need to know how to find healthy whole food and cook it. You need to know how to develop a system where you can get to sleep at night and all of the other skills that we know, but like it takes a lot. And that's why it took me decades to figure it out. How many of you guys have seen the film Castaway with Tom Hanks? Excellent. So there's a great scene in here, and he is making fire for the first time. And this guy like works for FedEx. He's just got a desk job, but he ends up on a deserted island and is in a full survival mode. And he has to learn how to make fire with by rubbing 2 sticks together, which it turns out is a very difficult thing to do. It's one of those things nobody teaches you how to do, right? But he has to figure it out, and it's life or death. So when he does figure it out, after sweating and suffering and hurting himself, he is so elated that he's like, oh, I made fire. And you might remember in the film, he throws himself this amazing party on the beach. And he's having a great time. And I love the idea that you can learn a skill like this, one skill, and throw yourself a party. We also are really hard on ourselves, beating ourselves up about what we don't know. We forget to celebrate each time we do learn. But the scene is also important for another reason. He's throwing himself a party despite the fact that there is still no hope right now of any rescue. He's going to wake up the next day on that island with one benefit of knowing how to make fire. He's going to survive probably, but he still has a lot of other stuff to figure out. And that's really true of what I call the skills of the healthy person, which are now also the new era survival skills. They're the things you're going to need to know how to do to make it in a society after the agricultural revolution and the digital and technological and industrial revolutions. So remember, those skills, those survival skills, those healthy living skills are not just diet and exercise. There are a whole bunch of other things. And, learning discrete skills like how to meditate or how to be more mindful by having certain practices and things, that's great. But all of these other things, how do you go to school and learn that stuff? It takes being alive for a while, and it takes putting attention on and importance on learning those skills. Because if you don't, you end up like 97.3% of the rest of the population. So if you're a leader, there are some additional skills that you need to sign up for and consciousnesses. And I'm just going to share these broad view for you and not go into them in depth. I'll make this presentation available if people would like it. They'll post it. You're welcome. My request would be if you share it with others, please just let them know where it came from. I'm writing a book about all of this. I've written a book about this that comes out in January. So making, obviously, health and wellness a value inside the organization is important. But you can't, I think, externalize this to an HR department or make it a corporate wellness initiative that lives over here somewhere on the side. That really, I don't see that working. People are spending a lot of money and it's like very impressive, but most people don't access those programs because they don't have time. They're just keeping going. I think also, as I mentioned, finding the people who are already healthy and asking them, how are they doing this? And what could you do as an organization to support them in being healthy deviants? Find the bright spots, elevate them, celebrate them. This is related to a branch of sociology called positive deviance, which is a little different than my concept of healthy deviance, but it's related. And look at how the default choices of your organization are shaping the behaviors. Make it about the money, because we know that always seems to drive a lot of great business decisions, right? We know all of this, and I won't spend a ton of time on it, but healthy employees are more productive. They show up more, they bring more to work, they have higher capacity. I talked about capacity. It makes you a much more attractive company for recruiting. Many, many, many millennials are considering the environment and values of their organization to be as important or just more important potentially than the job itself. And if you're interested in understanding more about the consciousness of healthy companies and healthy values and how they're shaping products and services, and even how your business's goals and objectives can be shaped by health-oriented things, check out NMI. They used to be called the Natural Marketing Institute. But NMI has a bunch of really cool research about lifestyles of health and sustainability. They've trended data over 20 years. It's just really interesting. Just the stuff that's free at their website is worth looking at. Of course, respecting your own body mind and others' body minds is really, really important. And this is easier said than done because it takes some of those skills that we talked about before. But yeah, what you eat, how you're managing your stress, how you're getting up and moving around and getting fresh air or not. Are you paying people to show up and just be slugs in chairs? No, you're paying people to bring their trillion-dollar minds. All of the stuff that Anil Seth just talked about, that's a very complex and extraordinary system. And you get hundreds of those to show up in a building at the same time. And then you create an environment where they don't function well. It's nuts. There's no more inefficient thing in the world to do than bring people together and then abuse them. So think about that. Make it easier for people to be healthy. I thought it was hilarious that Mo talked about that powdered coffee creamer, because that is for me, that is an indicator. If I walk into a company and I see the powdered creamer, I'm just oh, I know what kind of company this is. But at the same time, I think we sometimes go this other direction and we're a healthy company. And then you looked in the refrigerator and these little plastic cups with 2 carrot sticks, 2 celery sticks, and some hummus, or worse. And they're it's healthy food. Well, you can't live on that. And nobody wants to eat that. It's like rabbit food. I mean, you will in a pinch, maybe. But more often people go for the cold cereal and just pour that into a gigantic bowl and eat that. So, basically make it easier to make healthy choices than unhealthy ones. And I think having a community of healthy people that you can consult to say, what could we do to go to the healthy people, not to the corporate PR people. Another thing is that a lot of the corporate PR stuff, the corporate wellness stuff that's spooled out by HR tends to be based on, again, those USDA nutrition guidelines. So it's a lot of low-fat, 100-calorie snack pats that they're stocking up. How many people, did anybody else with me that this just is a terrible way to go? Yeah, it's not a fun thing. Sorry, booing. That's great. Oh, and this last piece of bringing healthy learning opportunities into work. This work I'm doing right now with Institute for Integrative Nutrition, it's been really interesting hearing from companies who are either encouraging their own people in their company to become health coaches, hiring health coaches, or bringing health education, information, yoga classes and things in. But I think if you could just get a regular seminar series going where you brought in really high quality educators and had the kind of people teach each other, the healthy people usually can't wait to share what they've learned. The skills of the healthy person, they're very proud of them. And if you do you have people who are healthy who would like to share what they know or what worked for them? Maybe share their turnaround story. Everyone has a turnaround story. I broke my foot, I got better, Setting a deviant example yourself is really important, but I want to emphasize that you do not need to be a physical Adonis in order to represent a healthy deviant. You show up, you make healthy choices, you acknowledge that you're choosing to be healthier and struggling and learning, and ask for help. Be a service-oriented leader, but also a servant leader. Like, that's a great thing. I would be a terrible presenter if I didn't give you a couple of minutes on you, because the leaders can only be as good as they are. Where to start? Remember that there's a whole world of healthy choices, and that ultimately you need to find that happy place where your personal goals and priorities and desires overlap with those choices. If you are struggling with healthy eating right now, maybe meditation or sleep is a better place to focus. Maybe just giving yourself a little time each day. This is what worked for me. I really wanted to reclaim my mornings, because I found that was a major factor in how all the rest of the day went. So now my routine is I have 3 minutes that I do before I turn on my cell phone, before I go to the computer, before I even have a conversation. I get a cup of tea or coffee, I sit down, light a candle, I have 3 minutes to do whatever it is I want. Sometimes I just sit and write or read, sometimes I pet my dog, sometimes I play my guitar, sometimes I meditate, but not always. So think about, what could you do for 3 minutes in the morning? The ultradian rhythm breaks I mentioned before, this is the idea of taking a 15 to 20 minute break every hour and a half to 2 hours. And it's incredibly important, because I'll show you why in just a second. But basically, you're programmed, just like your heart is programmed to beat at a certain rhythm and interval, and your eyes blink at a certain interval. This is programmed into us that we're not meant to be productive 24 hours a day. And then nighttime wind down is sort of the opposite of the 3-minute morning practice, but this is more like a 30-minute wind down. And lots of other people talk about how important this is to prepare your body to sleep. But this is a discipline that will change your whole perception and make it a lot easier the next morning to wake up feeling like a healthy, deviant human. The reasons this is so important, all of these practices, is that everything in nature works in these oscillating rhythms and cycles. Everything. And yet we've been told we should work like this. And that is a lot of what is killing us and making our society crazy. Wake up, go, 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 and then somehow magically fall asleep at night. Doesn't work that way. Like everything else, river systems, heart rhythms, brain rhythms, it all works like that. So we can get into agreement with it rather than being in this place of discord. I consider the ultradian rhythm break to be the ultimate biohack. And if you're interested in knowing more about that, we have a podcast episode of The Living Experiment called Pause. I've also written quite a lot about it. But what if people think I'm weird? Try taking the Bing Bang chair nap sometime and see what happens. Somebody will take a picture of you and send it to your boss. I just want to make a case what Martin Luther King called creative maladjustment. And much like Jiddu Krishnamurti, he recognized that when you try to comply with a society that's ill and crazy-making or unjust, bad things happen. It takes some, I guess that's my time. Last points I'll leave you with is the unhealthy default reality denies what reality is. Really, how our bodies actually work, how we're meant to operate as humans. The unhealthy default reality also depletes our capacity, right? Leaves us feeling frail and reactive, and our consciousness. And it really sets us up to fail. And feeling like a failure is a great way to end up doing a lot of unhealthy things, like taking drugs and eating sugar, the too much. So back to Neo and the Matrix. This is sort of where we're living right now. Our society is always reaching out to grab us and pull us in, and it's mesmerizing us in 1,000 ways. Setting yourself free from that is really where it's at. Audre Lorde said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. So, where do we go from here? Well, make your escape, obviously. We don't want you inside the unhealthy default reality. You can read my book, if you'd like. Listen to the podcast, Living Experiment. And the Healthy Deviant Manifesto, 3 points. Subvert the unhealthy default reality rather than being consumed by it. Call out the crazy when you see it. 860 moves for a hot upper body. You can point at that and laugh rather than feel victimized by it. And ultimately, I think we need to make it a party because there's too much shame and blame and guilt and suffering and self-denial involved the way we've presented health and fitness today. I want to have it be a lot more fun and make it a party because without deviation, progress is not possible. And that's what innovation is all about. But you guys have been a party to present to. Thank you so much for having me.